I should have noticed the pattern sooner. How my phone would light up with their names whenever they needed something. How the phrase, family helps family, only seemed to apply when they were on the receiving end. How they'd reminisce about blood being thicker than water while their hands were outstretched. But somehow, I wasn't prepared for that rainy Thursday night when I sat alone in the hospital waiting room, calls going straight to voicemail, watching as the same family who had drained my savings for years now blocked my number when I needed them most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony is, I used to believe in that family helps family mantra more than anyone. Growing up in the modest suburbs of Portland, I was the dependable one, the oldest of 3 siblings raised by our single mother, Diane, after our father left when I was 12. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital, so I became the stand-in. Parent, making sure Liam and Vanessa did their homework, got to school on time, and had dinner waiting when everyone got home. "You're the responsible one, Noah," Mom would tell me, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but warm with pride. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Even then, at 15, I felt the weight of those words. The subtle expectation that my needs came second to everyone else's. But I accepted it. That's what family meant, right? By 22, I had put myself through community college while working full-time at the local tech store. It wasn't glamorous, but I was making it work. Even managed to save up a small emergency fund that I was pretty proud of. My apartment was tiny but mine, my car was used but reliable, and I was taking night classes to get my bachelor's degree in computer science. I had plans, ambitions, a future taking shape. Then came the first call. "Noah, it's Mom. I hate to ask, but Vanessa's tuition payment is due and I'm short this month. Just a small loan until my next paycheck. You know I'm good for it." Of course, I helped. $2,000, nearly half my emergency fund, transferred immediately. Family helps family. The money was never repaid, but I didn't push it. Mom was working hard, and Vanessa needed her education. I'd rebuild my savings. 3 months later, Liam called. He'd been in a fender bender. Nothing serious, but he didn't have insurance. Could I help with the repairs? "You've always been the stable one, bro," he said, that charming grin audible even through the phone. "I promise I'll pay you back as soon as my band gets this gig we're waiting on." Another $1,500, gone. The gig never materialized. The repayment never came. By 25, this had become our family dynamic. I was the resource, the reliable, while they could draw from whenever their own finances ran dry. Mom's car broke down. Vanessa needed a security deposit for a new apartment after fighting with her roommate. Liam had an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. The family dinners I hosted in my apartment always ended the same way, with praise for my cooking followed by casual mentions of financial troubles, and each time the magic phrase would surface. "Family helps family." "Remember when Dad left and we only had each other?" Mom would say, squeezing my hand. "This is what makes us different. We show up for each other." And I did show up, every time. Even when it meant postponing my own dreams. Even when my degree took 2 years longer than planned because I couldn't afford full-time classes anymore. Even when I stayed at the same entry-level job because it was steady income they could rely on. My cousin Marcus was the only one who saw the pattern. "They're using you, Noah," he said. One night after witnessing Vanessa walk out with $300, I couldn't really spare. "You know that, right?" I defended them immediately. "They'd do the same for me if I needed it." Marcus just gave me a sad smile. "Would they, though? Have you ever actually tested that theory?" I hadn't. I'd never needed to. I was the stable one. The provider, the rock. I hadn't needed rescuing until I did. It started with headaches, dull at first, then sharp enough to wake me at night. I ignored them for weeks, too busy covering Liam's rent, again, to worry about doctor's appointments. By the time I finally went in, the neurologist's expression told me everything before she even spoke. "We found something on the scan, Noah. I'm going to refer you to a specialist. We need to move quickly." I sat in my car afterward, staring at the medical center's parking lot through a blur of tears. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly scared. And for the first time, I needed to be the one asking for help. The specialist didn't sugarcoat it. Surgery was necessary. Soon. My insurance would cover most of it, but the deductible and time off work would still leave me with nearly $12,000 in expenses. My savings had long since been depleted by family emergencies. That night, I called a family meeting at my apartment. I made their favorite meal, Mom's lasagna recipe, garlic bread, the works. I even bought the expensive wine Vanessa preferred. As they settled around my small dining table, I noticed how they all looked expectantly at me, the same look they always had when they needed something. "So what's up, big brother?" Liam asked, already on his second glass of wine. "You're being all mysterious." I took a deep breath and told them everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the recovery time, the costs. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift from curiosity to shock to something else, something that looked uncomfortably like calculation. "That's awful, honey," Mom said, reaching for my hand. Her eyes were sympathetic, but there was a guardedness there I'd never noticed before. "What did you say the timeline is?" 3 weeks. The doctor wants to operate before it gets worse." I paused. "I hate to ask, but I need help with the medical bills. I've helped all of you over the years, and now I—" Of course," Liam interrupted, suddenly very interested in his plate. "It's just, timing is tough right now. The band is this close to signing a deal, and I've got all my cash tied up in equipment." Vanessa nodded vigorously. "And I just signed that lease on the new place. I'm totally strapped until the next quarter when my commission structure changes." Mom at least had the decency to look guilty. "Sweetie, you know I would if I could, but the hours at the hospital have been cut back, and I'm barely making my mortgage as it is." I stared at them, these people I'd sacrificed for repeatedly, as they offered excuses instead of help. The room felt suddenly cold. "But I've given you thousands over the years," I said quietly. "All those times when you needed help." "That was different," Mom interjected, her tone sharper now. "Those were temporary setbacks. This is a lot of money, Noah. And it's not like you can guarantee when you'd pay it back," added Vanessa, as if she'd ever repaid a dime of what she'd borrowed. That's when Liam said it, the phrase that would echo in my mind for months to come. "Look, family helps family, but we have to be realistic. Family helps family, but only when I was the one helping, apparently." They left shortly after, all making vague promises to see what they could do and check their budgets. Not one of them offered a concrete commitment. As I closed the door behind them, Marcus's words rang in my ears. "Have you ever actually tested that theory?" Now I had, and now I knew. The week after the family dinner was a study in slow motion, abandonment. Day 1, 3 text messages checking if I was doing okay. No mention of financial help. Day 2, a link from Vanessa to a GoFundMe article with the message, "Maybe try this?" As if I should beg strangers online rather than expect help from the family who had drained my savings. Day 3, Mom called, spent 20 minutes talking about her workplace drama, then said she'd brainstormed some ideas but needed more time. Day 4, nothing. Day 5, Liam sent a meme. While I was scheduling my brain surgery. By day 6, I'd left 3 voicemails for each of them, each message a little more desperate than the last. I wasn't just asking anymore. I was pleading. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The surgery date was looming, and the hospital needed a deposit I didn't have. Mom, please call me back. The hospital needs an answer by tomorrow. Liam, I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. Remember when I covered your rent for 3 months straight? Vanessa, even 1,000 would help. I can figure out the rest somehow. Nothing. Complete radio silence. On day 7, I tried calling from Marcus's phone. Mom answered on the first ring, her voice bright and cheerful, until I spoke. Noah? Her tone shifted instantly. I was just about to call you. Things have been so hectic. You're screening my calls, I said quietly. The realization settled like ice in my stomach. All of you are. A pause. That's not fair. We're just processing. Processing what? That for once in my life, I need something from you instead of giving? This isn't a good time to talk about this, she said, her voice hardening. I'm at work. When is a good time, Mom? My surgery is in 2 weeks. I need to make arrangements now. Another pause, longer this time. Noah, we love you, but you can't expect us to magically produce thousands of dollars. We're not made of money. The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I magically produced money when they needed it? How many times had I worked overtime, eaten ramen for weeks, or postponed my own needs to meet theirs? I don't expect magic, Mom. I expect the same support I've given all of you. That's different, she snapped. Those were short-term problems. This is... She trailed off. This is what? My voice was barely a whisper now. This is too much, she finally said. We can't afford to get dragged down by medical debt. You know how these things spiral. Dragged down. Like I was an anchor instead of a son facing a life-threatening condition. Like my emergency was an inconvenience. To their lives rather than a crisis in mine. I see, I said, my voice hollow. Family helps family. Until it's too expensive. That's not fair, Noah. I hung up. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with all the evidence of my family's betrayal spread before me. Bank statements showing thousands of dollars in transfers to each of them over the years. Text messages thanking me for being their financial superhero. Birthday cards praising my generosity and dependability. It was Marcus who found me there the next morning, still staring at the papers, my phone buzzing with calls from the hospital billing department. They're not going to help, are they? He asked, though he already knew the answer. I shook my head. They've blocked my calls. Mom finally answered when I used your phone, but... I couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus sat across from me, pushing aside some of the bank statements. What are you going to do? A question that would have paralyzed me a week ago, but something had shifted inside me, something fundamental and permanent. The Noah who had existed before, the reliable doormat, the endless resource, was gone. In his place was someone colder, harder, and infinitely more determined. I'm going to get the surgery, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, and then I'm going to rebuild my life without them. Marcus nodded slowly. Your job's health insurance will cover most of it, right? What about the rest? I took a deep breath. I'm going to sell my car, take out a loan for the remainder, work, extra shifts at the store until the surgery. And after? After... I looked down at my phone as it lit up with another text from Vanessa, not asking how I was doing, but reminding me her birthday was next month. The audacity was almost impressive. After, I'm going to make sure I never need their help again. And more importantly, I said, deleting the message without responding, make sure they never have access to mine. Marcus's eyebrows rose. That's pretty final. So was their response when I needed them. That afternoon, I made 3 decisive moves that would change the course of my life. First, I listed my car, the only thing of value I owned, on 3 different selling platforms. Second, I walked into First Regional Bank and applied for A personal loan, using my perfect credit score that I'd protected even while bailing out my family's financial disasters. Third, I texted all 3 family members the same message. I figured out my medical situation on my own. Don't worry about helping. I'll be taking some time to focus on my health and won't be available for a while. The responses came quickly, relief poorly disguised as concern. That's great, honey. I knew you'd figure it out. Proud of you, bro. Knew you had it handled. Let us know if you need anything, but glad you've got it covered. Not one of them asked how I'd managed to come up with $12,000 overnight. Not one of them offered to visit before my surgery or help during recovery. They were simply glad to be off the hook. That night, as I finalized the sale of my car to a young couple who would pick it up the next day, my phone rang. It was Liam. Hey, so, Mom said you're all set with the hospital stuff? His voice had that familiar tone, the one that always preceded a request. I've worked it out, I said neutrally. That's awesome, man. I knew you would. A pause. So, I hate to ask, but since you're good now, that equipment I mentioned? For the band? The dealer's only holding it until Friday, and I'm about $800 short. $800, while I was selling my only mode of transportation to pay for brain surgery. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was parasitism, and I had been the willing host for far too long. I can't help you, Liam, I said, my voice calm. What? But you just said you figured out your money situation. By selling my car and taking out a loan that will take me years to repay. A long pause. Oh, well, maybe just a couple hundred then? We've got this gig that could really… No. The silence that followed was deafening. Wow, he finally said, his voice cold. Pretty selfish, Noah. I thought family helped family. As he said those words, the same words they'd used to extract thousands from me over the years. Something inside me finally broke free. Goodbye, Liam, I said, and ended the call. I blocked his number immediately afterward. Then Mom's, then Vanessa's. 3 days later, I checked into the hospital alone. Hospital rooms have a way of clarifying what matters. In the sterile white space with its mechanical hums and antiseptic smell, I found a strange kind of peace. The nurses were kinder to me than my own family had been. The doctors spoke to me with more respect than I'd received in years from those who claimed to love me. You're being very brave coming through this alone, my night nurse Elena said as she checked my vitals the evening before surgery. Her eyes were kind, her manner gentle. I shrugged. Not much choice. There's always a choice, she said, adjusting my IV. Many patients have family who make things worse, not better. Sometimes choosing solitude is choosing peace. Her words stayed with me as they wheeled me into surgery the next morning. As the anesthesia took hold, I wondered if I would wake up, and if I did, who I would be on the other side of this experience. I did wake up. The surgery was successful, the tumor benign, the removal complete. The first face I saw was Marcus, sitting beside my bed with dark circles under his eyes. You look terrible, I croaked, my throat raw from the intubation. He laughed. Says the guy with half his head shaved and stitches like a baseball? They called you? He nodded. You put me down as your emergency contact. Been here since they took you in. I tried to swallow my emotion, but in my weakened state, it was impossible. Tears slid down my face before I could stop them. Hey, none of that, he said, squeezing my hand. You're going to be fine. It's not that, I whispered. It's just, you're here, and they're not. Marcus's expression darkened. Yeah, about that. They've been calling me. My heart lurched. Since when? Since they couldn't reach you. Apparently, they realized something was wrong when Vanessa drove by your place and saw your car was gone. Of course. They hadn't worried about my surgery. They'd worried about why I wasn't responding to their financial requests. What did they say? Marcus hesitated. They're concerned. Or at least that's what they're saying. Your mom's been calling hourly, wants to know which hospital you're in. I closed my eyes, processing this information. Did you tell them? No, he said firmly. Not my information to share. I just said you were getting medical care and would contact them when you were ready. Relief washed over me. Thank you. But they're persistent, he warned. Your mom mentioned something about being there for you during recovery. Said she could move in temporarily to help. The thought of my mother in my apartment, watching me, judging me, asking me, even in my weakened state, for small loans, made me physically ill. The heart monitor beside me actually beeped in protest. No, I said firmly. Absolutely not. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. That's what I figured, but they're going to keep pushing. Let them, I said, a new resolve strengthening my voice. I'm done. The words hung in the air between us. I'm done. So simple, yet so massive. I was done being the family ATM. Done sacrificing my needs for people who viewed me as nothing more than a resource. Done hoping they would reciprocate even a fraction of what I'd given them. You sure? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew my answer. They are your family. Were, I corrected. They were my family. Recovery was harder than I expected, not just physically, though the headaches, dizziness, and fatigue were brutal, but emotionally. Years of putting everyone else first had left me without the skills to prioritize my own healing. I had to learn to rest without feeling guilty, to accept help from friends and coworkers who organized meal deliveries and drove me to follow-up appointments, to say no when work tried to rush me back before I was ready. Through it all, the calls from my family continued. First to Marcus, then to my workplace when they couldn't reach him. Their messages followed a predictable pattern, concern mixed with subtle accusations. We're just worried. Why won't he talk to us? What did we do to deserve being shut out like this? After everything we've done for him. 3 weeks into my recovery, they escalated. My mother showed up at my apartment building, pressing every buzzer until someone let her in. I refused to open my door despite her knocking for nearly an hour. Noah, this is ridiculous, she called through the door. We're your family. You can't just cut us off. I sat silently on my couch, still weak from surgery, as she continued. Is this about the money? Because that's just petty, Noah. We would have helped, if we could. That's when something broke inside me. Not in the painful way it had before, but in a clarifying way, like a dam breaking to release a flood. I stood up, steadied myself against the wall, and opened the door. My mother's face registered shock at my appearance, the healing incision visible beneath my growing hair, the weight I'd lost, the pallor of my skin. Oh my God, she whispered. Noah. You need to leave, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She tried to push past me into the apartment. Don't be ridiculous. Look at you. You need help. Not from you. I blocked her entry. Not anymore. Her expression hardened. What is that supposed to mean? It means I asked for help once, the only time in my adult life, and you all abandoned me. Worse, you blocked my calls when I needed you most. We didn't abandon you, she protested. We just couldn't what? Couldn't return even a fraction of what I've given all of you over the years. Couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital? Couldn't even check if I was alive after brain surgery? She flinched. We didn't know when the surgery was. You shut us out! After you shut me out first! My voice rose, sending a sharp pain through my healing head. I had to sell my car and take out loans because my own family, who I've supported for years, couldn't be bothered to help me. That's not fair. No, it wasn't fair. None of this has been fair, but it's been clarifying. I took a deep breath. I know exactly where I stand now. She shifted strategies, her eyes filling with tears. Noah, we love you. We're family. Family helps family, I said softly. Isn't that what you always said when you needed money? The color drained from her face. Goodbye, Mom, I said, closing the door despite her protests. She continued knocking, continued calling through the door, but something had changed inside me. Her words no longer had power. Her tears no longer moved me. The guilt she'd wielded, like a weapon for years, bounced harmlessly off my new resolve. Eventually, she left. I locked the door, turned off my phone, and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, despite still being in recovery, I opened my laptop and began researching coding boot camps. My computer science degree had stalled because of my family's constant financial needs, but I didn't need a degree to build a career in tech. I just needed skills and determination, and I had plenty of determination now. I applied to an intensive 12-week program with a deferred payment model. I wouldn't need to pay tuition until I landed a job paying at least $60,000. It was a risk, but a calculated one. And for once, I was putting my future first. When I received my acceptance email a week later, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone waiting for things to improve, but the confident hope of someone actively changing their circumstances. I was reinventing myself. And my family would never recognize the person I was becoming. The boot camp was both the hardest and best thing I'd ever done for myself. For 12 weeks, I lived and breathed code. From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., I sat in classes learning JavaScript, Python, and full-stack development. Evenings were spent on projects, struggling through challenges that seemed impossible until suddenly they weren't. Weekends disappeared into research and additional tutorials. The physical toll was significant. I was still recovering from surgery, and the headaches sometimes made staring at screens for hours unbearable. But I pushed through, taking breaks when necessary, working twice as hard when I felt well enough. You're one of our most determined students, my instructor Dahlia told me after I stayed 3 hours late debugging a project. Most people would have given up hours ago. I shrugged. I don't have the luxury of giving up. She studied me for a moment. Can I ask why this matters so much to you? Most students have their motivations: career advancement, better pay, creative fulfillment. But it feels like something else is driving you. I hesitated, unused to talking about my family situation, but something about Dahlia's direct approach made me want to be honest. I'm rebuilding, I said finally. Not just a career, a life. She nodded, seeming to understand more than I'd explicitly stated. Well, for what it's worth, you're doing an impressive job of it. That small validation from someone who had no obligation to care about me meant more than all the empty, family helps family platitudes I'd heard over the years. As the weeks progressed, I found myself changing in ways that went beyond programming, skills. I was becoming more assertive, more willing to ask questions, more comfortable setting boundaries. The person who had let family members drain his bank account for years was disappearing, replaced by someone who valued his time, energy, and resources. Halfway through the boot camp, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. A recruiter from Technova, a growing startup, had seen the projects I'd posted to GitHub. Your work shows impressive problem-solving skills, the message read. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities once you complete your program? I stared at the screen in disbelief. Companies weren't supposed to approach bootcamp students until graduation, especially not companies with Technova's reputation. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. That night, I called Marcus to share the news. That's incredible, Noah, he exclaimed. Technova's one of the good ones, right? Actual benefits? Reasonable hours? And salaries starting at 80,000, I added, still processing what this could mean. It would change everything. You deserve it, Marcus said firmly. After everything you've been through. I paused, a question I'd been avoiding suddenly pressing. Have you heard from them? Marcus didn't need clarification on who them was. Yeah, he admitted. Your mom calls every couple of weeks. Liam texted last month asking if I knew why you'd blocked them. What did you tell him? The truth. That they abandoned you when you needed them most, and they're facing the consequences. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And he said I was being dramatic. That family disagreements happen all the time and you'd get over it eventually. A hollow laugh escaped me. They still don't get it. No, Marcus agreed. They think this is temporary, that eventually you'll come back to being their safety net. Not happening, I said, a new firmness in my voice. Not ever again. I know, he said, and for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not just for the coding and the job stuff, but for breaking the cycle. His words stayed with me as I threw myself back into the final weeks of the boot camp. I was no longer just working for a career change. I was working for independence, for security, for a life where I would never again be vulnerable to people who claimed to love me, but disappeared when I needed them. The final project was a test of everything we'd learned, a full-stack application that would demonstrate our skills to potential employers. While most students created e-commerce platforms or social media clones, I built something different. Family Loan was a financial tracking app for personal loans between family members. It formalized the lending process with payment schedules, automated reminders, and even simple contracts that could be electronically signed. It was designed to remove the emotional manipulation from family financial transactions. When I presented it to the class, Dahlia raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice. What inspired this? Personal experience, I said simply. Too many people use family connections to avoid financial responsibility. A few classmates nodded in recognition. Everyone, it seemed, had a story about a relative who borrowed money and never repaid it. What I didn't mention was that while building the app, I had calculated exactly how much my family had borrowed from me over the years, adding modest interest rates. The total came to just over $42,000, money I would never see again, but which now served as a concrete reminder of why I was rebuilding my life without them. The final week of boot camp coincided with my latest follow-up appointment. The neurosurgeon reviewed my scans with a satisfied nod. Looking good, Noah. No signs of regrowth. I'd say we got it all. Relief flooded through me. So I'm cured? I'd prefer to say you're in remission, he cautioned. We'll keep monitoring. But yes, the prognosis is excellent. As I left the hospital, the same one where I'd undergone surgery 4 months earlier, I felt a profound sense of symmetry. My brain was healing. My life was transforming. And the people who had abandoned me when I was at my lowest would never have the chance to hurt me again. Graduation day arrived with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The boot camp organized a showcase where students demonstrated their final projects to invited industry professionals. I stood beside my display, explaining Family Loan to interested recruiters, including the one from Technova who had reached out earlier. This solves a real problem, she said, impressed. The interface is clean, the functionality is intuitive, and the authentication system is stronger than what we see from most juniors. Thank you, I replied, the validation washing over me. We'd like to move forward, she continued. Are you available for a formal interview next week? Just as I was about to answer, a familiar voice cut through the crowded room. Noah. I froze, my body tensing involuntarily. Slowly, I turned to see Vanessa standing a few feet away, her expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like calculation. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice deliberately neutral. She glanced around at the displays, the recruiters, the atmosphere of opportunity. Marcus mentioned you were doing some tech program. I was in the area for a job interview and saw the signs for the showcase. Her eyes flickered to the Technova recruiter. Looks like you're doing well for yourself. The calculation in her eyes was now unmistakable. I could practically see her reassessing my value as a resource. I am, I said simply. The Technova recruiter sensed the tension. I'll give you a moment. Let's connect later about that interview. She handed me her card and walked to the next display. Vanessa stepped closer. You look different. I am different, I replied. Mom misses you, she said, her voice softening into the manipulative tone I now recognized all too well. We all do. This silent treatment has gone on long enough, don't you think? 3 months ago, those words might have caused me to waver. Now they bounced off me like rain on a window. Did you need something, Vanessa? I asked. Because I have recruiters to speak with. Her facade slipped slightly. That's it? After all these years of being a family, you're just done with us? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt nothing but a distant sadness. Family helps. Family, I said quietly, but you didn't help me. So no, we're not family anymore. We're just people who used to know each other. Her expression hardened. You know what your problem is, Noah. You hold grudges. You always have. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Goodbye, Vanessa, I said, turning back to my display. I wish you well, but I don't wish to see you again. She stood there for a moment longer, waiting for me to relent, to apologize, to fall back into old patterns. When I didn't, she finally left, muttering something about me being selfish. As I watched her walk away, I realized something important. I was free. Not just from financial obligations or emotional manipulation, but from the need for their approval. Their opinions, even their presence in my life, no longer mattered. I had built something new. And I was just getting started. The Technova interview process was rigorous. 3 technical assessments, 2 culture fit interviews, and a final meeting with the CTO. I prepared obsessively, spending hours on practice problems and researching the company's products. When they made an offer 2 weeks after graduation, I nearly dropped the phone. $85,000. Full benefits, stock options, remote flexible work. In one moment, my financial reality completely transformed. The salary was more than triple what I'd made at the tech store. The benefits would cover my ongoing medical care. The remote option meant I could move somewhere more affordable. I accepted immediately. My first day at Technova coincided with an unexpected development. A letter from a collection agency addressed to Liam, forwarded to my apartment. Apparently, he'd used my address for a loan application months ago, and now he was defaulting on payments. In my previous life, I would have called him immediately, offered to help sort it out, maybe even covered the payments until he got back on his feet. The old Noah would have sacrificed his own financial health to protect his brother from consequences. The new Noah shredded the letter and blocked the collection agency's number. Not my problem, not anymore. Starting at Technova brought expected challenges. As a bootcamp graduate, I had to work twice as hard to prove myself alongside colleagues with computer science degrees. The imposter syndrome was real, the learning curve steep. You're doing better than you think, my team lead, Raj, assured me after I apologized for asking too many questions during my second week. Everyone starts somewhere. The ones who succeed are those who aren't afraid to admit what they don't. No. It was a perspective I'd never considered, that acknowledging my limitations could be a strength rather than a weakness. As my confidence at work grew, I made another significant change. I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood. The old place held too many memories. My mother's knocking on the door during my recovery, the countless times my siblings had crashed on my couch when they were between living situations, the kitchen table where I'd written so many checks, to cover their emergencies. My new place was a modern one-bedroom in a secure building with an actual doorman. It cost more than my previous apartment, but I could afford it now. More importantly, the building wouldn't let visitors up without my explicit permission, a barrier between me and any unwanted family reunions. 3 months into my new job, I received my first performance bonus. I sat staring at the notification email, processing what the extra $5,000 meant. In my previous life, this money would have disappeared immediately, divided among family needs, claimed by the next crisis. Now, it was mine. All mine. I transferred $4,000 directly to my medical debt, a significant dent in what I still owed for the surgery. The remaining $1,000 I set aside for something I'd never had before, an actual vacation, just for me. Because I deserved it. The decision to travel alone was liberating. I chose Seattle, far enough to feel like an adventure, close enough to manage with my lingering medical fatigue. For 5 days, I explored the city, visited museums, ate at restaurants without checking prices, and slept in a hotel with an actual view. On my last night there, sitting on the hotel balcony watching the sunset over Puget Sound, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not the conditional happiness I'd known before, the kind that existed in brief moments between family crises, but a sustained contentment built on security, autonomy, and self-respect. I was interrupted from this reflection by a text from an unknown number. "Noah, it's Mom. Please call me. It's important." The familiar anxiety spiked immediately, that Pavlovian response to urgency from family members who had trained me to jump at their every crisis. But now I could recognize it for what it was: conditioning, not obligation. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another text. "Liam's in trouble. He needs your help. Please call." Another familiar pattern, using one family member's crisis to bypass another's boundaries. In the past, I would have called immediately, heart racing, ready to solve whatever problem had emerged. Now, I set the phone face down on the table and continued watching the sunset. By morning, there were 6 more messages escalating in urgency. I read them with clinical detachment, recognizing the manipulation tactics that once would have worked so effectively. Family emergency. "This isn't like you, Noah. After everything we've done for you. Liam might lose his apartment. How can you be so selfish? Family helps family." That last one, their mantra, their guilt trigger, their extraction tool, almost made me laugh. They still didn't understand what had changed. They still thought they could pull those old levers and I would respond like before. I blocked the new number and enjoyed my last breakfast in Seattle, ordering room service simply because I could. When I returned to work the following week, I threw myself into a challenging new project, a payment processing system that would become central to Technova's platform. The work was complex, requiring late nights and intense focus, but I thrived on the responsibility. For the first time in my professional life, I was valued for my skills rather than my willingness to be exploited. 6 months into my new job, I received a LinkedIn message that stopped me cold. "Noah, I know you've blocked everyone's numbers. This is Vanessa. Mom and Liam are in serious financial trouble. They're about to be evicted. I know things ended badly, but please help them. They're still your family." I stared at the message, aware of how differently it affected me now compared to how it would have a year earlier. The guilt was just a whisper, not a roar. The obligation felt distant, not immediate. I clicked on Vanessa's profile out of curiosity. Her information showed she'd recently started a new job at a marketing firm, a position that, according to Glassdoor, would pay her around $70,000. More than enough to help Mom and Liam if she chose to. But of course, that wasn't how my family operated. Why should Vanessa deplete her resources when Noah, the reliable one, could do it instead? I closed the message without responding and returned to my code. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned the most important lesson of my life. Some relationships only exist as long as you're willing to be used. That evening, I received an email notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my account using the password recovery option. The IP address traced back to my hometown. A cold anger settled over me as I realized what was happening. They weren't just trying to contact me. They were trying to access my money directly. Perhaps they'd guessed that my improved circumstances meant larger sums were available for taking. I immediately changed all my passwords, set up two-factor authentication, and placed a security alert on my accounts. Then I did something I'd been considering for months. I consulted a lawyer about a cease and desist letter. Family estrangement is more common than people realize, the lawyer told me during our consultation. You have every right to set boundaries, including legal ones. As I authorized the letter, formal, legally binding documentation that my family was to make no further attempts to contact me, I felt no sadness, only resolution. They had made their choice when they blocked my calls. During my medical crisis, I was simply formalizing the reality they had created. 1 week later, I received a promotion at Technova, junior developer to developer, with another salary increase. As I accepted the congratulations from my team, I realized something profound. The energy I had once poured into solving my family's endless problems was now directed toward my own growth, and the results were transformative. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, and I had done it all without them. The cease and desist letter worked for exactly 3 months and 17 days. That was how long my family respected legal boundaries before trying again, this time through an intermediary. My former high school teacher, Mrs. Benson, reached out via email with concerns about my family situation. Your mother contacted me, Noah, she wrote. She's worried about you. Says you've cut off all contact with your family after some misunderstanding. I remember you as such a kind, family-oriented young man. Perhaps you could consider reconciliation. The attempted manipulation was so transparent it almost felt lazy. Of course they would find someone from my past, someone who knew me as the responsible child who took care of everything, someone who might trigger my old people-pleasing instincts. My response was polite but firm. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Benson. This wasn't a misunderstanding, but a pattern of exploitation that culminated in my family abandoning me during a medical crisis. I've made my boundaries clear, including through legal channels. Please respect my decision. She didn't reply, and I felt no guilt. Another small victory in my ongoing recovery from a lifetime of emotional manipulation. At Technova, I was thriving, in ways I'd never imagined possible. My payment processing system had launched successfully, earning me recognition from company leadership. I was assigned to mentor new hires, a responsibility that confirmed my growing expertise. You have a gift for explaining complex concepts, my manager commented during my 1-year review, and you're patient with beginners. That's rare in tech. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same qualities that had made me an ideal target for my family's financial parasitism, patience, generosity, willingness to help, were now assets in my professional life, deployed in an environment that valued rather than exploited them. With my career advancing steadily, I made another significant decision. I started my own side project. Family Loan, the app I'd created during boot camp, had potential beyond a student project. I reworked it in the evenings and weekends, improving the code, expanding the features, preparing it for actual deployment. My vision had evolved. This wouldn't just be an app for tracking family loans. It would be a platform for establishing financial boundaries in all relationships. Users could create formalized lending agreements, set up payment schedules, receive automated reminders, and even generate reports on their giving patterns to identify potential exploitation. I called the new version Boundary Pay, and registered it as an LLC. Working on Boundary Pay became my passion, not just for the technical challenge, but for its mission. Every line of code felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, transforming my painful experience into something that might help others avoid similar situations. 18 months after starting at Teknova, I'd accomplished what once seemed impossible. My medical debt was paid in full. I had 6 months of living expenses in an emergency fund. My retirement account was growing steadily. Boundary Pay was in beta testing with promising feedback. My health was stable, with scans showing no signs of tumor recurrence. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my agency. My time, energy, and resources were mine to allocate as I chose, not consumed by the endless crises of people who saw me as nothing more than a safety net. The contrast between my current life and my previous existence became abundantly clear when I received an unusual email, a wedding invitation from a cousin on my father's side, someone I hadn't seen since childhood. "We found you through social media," the note explained. "Would love to reconnect." I was hesitant but curious. This was family I'd had little contact with even before cutting ties with my mother and siblings. After some consideration, I decided to attend. The wedding was in San Diego, a city I'd never visited. I booked a nice hotel, packed my best suit, and flew down for the weekend, another luxury the old Noah could never have afforded. At the reception, I was introduced to relatives I barely remembered or had never met. The conversation inevitably turned to my immediate family. "We heard you've had some difficulties with your mom and siblings," my father's brother, Uncle David, said carefully as we stood by the bar. I took a sip of my drink. "That's one way to put it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Your dad wasn't much different, you know. Always taking, rarely giving back. It's why we didn't stay close after your parents split." This was new information, a context for my family's behavior I'd never considered. "You think it's a pattern in that branch of the family?" "Absolutely." He looked at me with unexpected understanding. "When we heard you'd broken away, many of us weren't surprised. Impressed, but not surprised. It takes courage to set boundaries with family." His words, his validation of my decision, affected me more than I expected. All this time, I'd carried a small, persistent doubt. Was I the villain in this story? Was I the selfish one for protecting myself? Hearing that others had made similar choices with the same branch of my family was oddly comforting. The wedding reception continued, and I found myself enjoying conversations with these distant relatives who somehow felt more like family than the people I'd grown up with. We exchanged contact information with genuine intentions to stay in touch. On my flight home, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in 2 years. From a medical crisis that exposed my family's true nature, to a successful career and a promising side business, the trajectory was steep and positive. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. The crushing need for approval, the reflexive guilt, the sense of obligation to people who gave nothing in return, all had diminished to manageable whispers rather than deafening commands. It was healing, not just from brain surgery, but from decades of emotional exploitation. 2 weeks after returning from the wedding, I received unexpected news. Teknova was being acquired by Quantum Digital, one of the largest tech companies in the industry. The announcement sent shockwaves through the office, excitement mixed with anxiety about what would change. For me, the acquisition brought an immediate benefit. My stock options, which I'd all but forgotten about, suddenly had real value. The acquisition deal valued them at just over $140,000, more money than I'd ever had at one time. As I stared at the valuation document, I experienced a moment of deeply ingrained panic. My first thought, conditioned by years of family dynamics, was, how do I hide this from them? How do I protect this from their inevitable requests? Then I remembered. I didn't have to hide anything. They had no access to my life, no claim on my success. The money was mine, all mine, to use as I saw fit, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. First, I allocated funds to fully develop and launch Boundary Pay. The app had been growing steadily in beta, with users reporting that it had helped them establish healthier financial relationships. With proper funding, it could reach many more people. Second, I decided to buy a home, something I'd never thought possible before. Not just any home, but a townhouse in a neighborhood I loved, with security features that would ensure my privacy and safety. The rest went into investments, a diversified portfolio that would grow over time, providing additional security against future uncertainties. As I finalized these plans, I caught myself smiling at the ultimate irony. If my family had helped me during my medical crisis, if they'd shown even a fraction of the support I'd given them over the years, I likely would have shared this windfall with them. I would have continued the cycle of giving without receiving. Their rejection, painful as it had been, had freed me to create a life of abundance for myself. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become unexpected blessings. My family abandoning me during my greatest need had ultimately led to my greatest triumph. I was no longer the family ATM. I was Noah, successful developer, entrepreneur, and architect of my own destiny, and I was just getting started. The townhouse. Closing was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. I'd spent weeks preparing for this milestone, arranging financing, coordinating inspections, planning renovations. This would be the first home I'd ever owned, a physical manifestation of how far I'd come. The night before closing, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but with all the real estate transactions in progress, I answered. "Is this Noah Mitchell?" a woman's professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Noah. This is Sandra Porter from Portland General Hospital. I'm calling because you're listed as next of kin for Diane Mitchell." My blood ran cold. "My mother? What happened?" "She was admitted earlier today with severe pneumonia that's progressed to sepsis. Her condition is critical, and we need family to make some decisions regarding her care." I sat down heavily on my couch, the world suddenly tilting sideways. Despite everything that had happened, despite the boundaries I'd established, this news hit me with unexpected force. "Mr. Mitchell, are you there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here, but I haven't spoken to my mother in almost 2 years. I'm not the right person for this." A pause. "You're the only emergency contact in her records. She does have 2 other children listed, but we haven't been able to reach them." Of course they couldn't reach Liam and Vanessa. My siblings had always been experts at disappearing when responsibility knocked. "I understand this may be complicated," the nurse continued, her voice softening. "But your mother's condition is serious. The doctors need decisions about her treatment plan soon." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. I had worked so hard to establish boundaries, to protect myself from the emotional and financial exploitation that had defined our relationship, and yet, "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I heard myself say. The hospital was exactly as I remembered from my own medical crisis. The same antiseptic smell, the same fluorescent lighting, the same sense of time suspended between crisis and resolution. The key difference was that when I had been the patient, no family had come rushing to my bedside. At the ICU nurses' station, I introduced myself and was immediately handed a stack of forms. Medical decisions, insurance information, financial responsibility paperwork. "Her insurance coverage is limited," the administrative assistant explained. "There will be significant out-of-pocket expenses." Of course there would be. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was directed to my mother's room, bracing myself for what I might find. The woman in the hospital bed barely resembled the mother I remembered. She looked smaller, older, frailer, oxygen mask covering most of her face, monitoring, equipment beeping steadily beside her. She was unconscious, the doctor explained. The infection had overwhelmed her system, requiring aggressive antibiotic treatment and respiratory support. The next 48 hours would be critical. As I stood there, watching her labored breathing, the emotional conflict within me was overwhelming. This was the woman who had helped shape me, both my strengths and my vulnerabilities. The woman who had taught me that family helps family while demonstrating the exact opposite when I needed her most. "We'll need a decision about the treatment plan," the doctor said gently. "There are some more aggressive options, but they're not covered by her insurance." And there it was, the familiar request for financial rescue, this time delivered by a medical professional rather than directly from her lips. I stepped out into the hallway, needing space to think. As I leaned against the wall, my phone buzzed with a text from the real estate agent. "All set for closing tomorrow, 2 p.m. at the title company office." Tomorrow. The day I was supposed to buy my first home, a symbol of my independence, my recovery, my new life built on self-respect and boundaries. I called Marcus, my hands shaking slightly. "She's really sick," I told him after explaining the situation. "They need decisions. They need someone to take financial responsibility." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking of doing?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, to tell them to keep trying Liam and Vanessa, to remind them that when I was the one in a hospital bed, she blocked my calls. And the other part? I sighed heavily. The other part knows I'll hate myself if she dies and I did nothing. "That's because you're not like them," Marcus said simply. "You never were." After we hung up, I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a cold cup of coffee, weighing my options. I could walk away, maintain the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. I could sign the minimum required paperwork but refuse financial responsibility. Or I could step back into the role I'd played my entire life, the reliable one, the safety net, the endless resource. The decision I made would define not just my relationship with my dying mother, but my relationship with myself. I returned to the ICU and spoke with the doctor about treatment options. Then I signed the necessary forms, authorizing the more aggressive treatment that offered the best chance of recovery. But I added specific limitations to the financial responsibility paperwork. I would cover up to $25,000 of unreimbursed medical expenses, a significant amount, but one with a clear boundary. Beyond that, other solutions would need to be found. It wasn't walking away. But it wasn't a blank check either. I spent the night in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my mother's bed, watching the monitors, listening to the rhythm of the machines keeping her alive. In those quiet hours, memories surfaced. Some good, some painful, all complicated. I remembered her working double shifts when we were young, determined to keep the family afloat after my father left. I remembered her proud smile when I graduated high school, but I also remembered her dismissive response when I called begging for help before my surgery. The way she'd said, "We can't afford to get dragged down by medical debt," as if my life was a financial inconvenience. Morning came with marginal improvement in her condition. "The antibiotics may be working," the doctor said cautiously. "But she's not out of danger yet." I stepped out to call the real estate agent, explaining that I had a family emergency and needed to reschedule the closing. She was understanding, assuring me we could push it back a few days without complications. As I ended the call, I turned to see Vanessa walking toward the nurse's station, looking harried and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than a month's rent. "Where is she?" "Diane Mitchell?" she demanded of the nurse. The nurse pointed in my direction, and Vanessa froze when she saw me. For a moment, genuine surprise registered on her face. "You're here," she said, as if the concept was difficult to process. "I am." I kept my voice neutral. How is she? Critical but stable. The new antibiotic protocol seems to be helping. Vanessa nodded, then asked the question I was waiting for. Who's handling the paperwork? The expenses? Of course that would be her first concern. Not our mother's condition, but who was taking financial responsibility. I've signed the necessary forms, I said, with limits. Her relief was palpable. Good. That's good. She glanced toward our mother's room. Has Liam been by? No. Have you spoken to him? She shook her head. He's not answering my calls. Then, with obvious reluctance. Thanks for, being here. I nodded, but said nothing more. Her gratitude felt hollow. Appreciation, not for my presence, but for my willingness to shoulder a burden she clearly had no intention of sharing. Over the next 3 days, a familiar pattern emerged. I remained at the hospital, coordinating with doctors, making decisions, managing the situation. Vanessa appeared sporadically, always with an excuse about why she couldn't stay long. Liam never showed at all. By day 4, my mother's condition had stabilized enough for the doctors to express cautious optimism. She was still unconscious, but the infection was responding to treatment. Recovery would be long, but possible. That afternoon, as I worked remotely from the hospital waiting room, Vanessa approached with 2 cups of coffee. Peace offering, she said, holding one out to me. I accepted it warily. So, she began, sitting beside me. The doctors say she'll need rehabilitation after this. Maybe assisted living for a while. And there it was, the real purpose behind the coffee. Not connection, not reconciliation, but preparation for another request. They mentioned that, I said neutrally. Her insurance won't cover much of it. Vanessa continued. And my job, well, the commission structure changed. Things are tight right now. I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. Designer clothes, professionally highlighted hair, manicured nails, the external trappings of success without the financial responsibility to match. What exactly are you asking, Vanessa? She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm not asking anything. I'm just saying this is going to be expensive. And you're doing so well now. The familiar rage threatened to surface. The same cold anger I'd felt when they'd abandoned me during my medical crisis. But instead of letting it control me, I channeled it into something more productive. Clarity. I've committed to covering $25,000 of Mom's unreimbursed medical expenses, I said calmly. Beyond that, other arrangements will need to be made. Perhaps you could explore selling her house to fund her care. Vanessa looked shocked. Sell Mom's house? But where would she live after recovery? Where would Liam live? So that was it. Liam was living with Mom. No wonder they were concerned about funding her care. It affected their living situation directly. Those are legitimate questions, I acknowledged. But they're not my questions to answer. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the solution to this problem. Not beyond what I've already committed to. Her expression shifted from shock to something harder. Wow, success really has changed you, Noah. You used to care about family. I almost laughed at the audacity. I cared enough to empty my savings for all of you repeatedly. I cared when I needed brain surgery and couldn't reach any of you. I cared when you all blocked my calls during the worst crisis of my life. She flinched but recovered quickly. That was different. Yes, I agreed. It was. Because I'm still here, helping within boundaries. When I needed you, you all disappeared completely. Vanessa stood up, coffee forgotten. You know what? Keep your money. We'll figure something out. As she walked away, I realized something important. I felt nothing. No guilt. No obligation. No crushing sense of responsibility for solving their problems. I had set a boundary, a generous one, considering our history, and I was at peace with it. The old Noah would have chased after her, apologizing, offering more. The new Noah returned to his laptop, knowing he had done enough. My mother regained consciousness on the 5th day. I was working on my laptop in her room when I noticed her, eyes flutter open, confusion clouding her features as she registered the unfamiliar surroundings. "Water," she whispered hoarsely. I helped her take a small sip through a straw, then pressed the call button for the nurse. "Noah?" Recognition dawned in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" The question contained multitudes, not just curiosity about my presence, but acknowledgement of our estrangement, the boundaries I'd established, the communication that had ceased 2 years prior. "You're in the hospital," I explained simply. "You had pneumonia that progressed to sepsis. You've been unconscious for several days." She looked around the room, then back at me. "Vanessa? Liam?" "Vanessa has been by a few times. Liam hasn't come. Yet?" She closed her eyes briefly, whether from fatigue or disappointment I couldn't tell. When she opened them again, there was a wariness in her gaze. "Why are you here?" she asked again, more directly. I considered my answer carefully. "The hospital called me as your emergency contact. Someone needed to make medical decisions. And you did that?" A note of surprise in her voice. "After everything?" Before I could respond, the nurse entered to check my mother's vitals and condition. I stepped out of the room, grateful for the temporary reprieve from a conversation I wasn't sure how to navigate. In the hallway, I called Marcus to update him. "She's awake and asking questions," I told him, "including why I'm here." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That the hospital called me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are you planning to stay now that she's conscious?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself. My obligation as a medical decision-maker was technically fulfilled now that she could speak for herself. I could walk away with a clear conscience, having done more than many would in my position. And yet, "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to see this through, at least until she's stable enough for discharge. Another part feels like I'm sliding back into old patterns." "There's a difference between compassion and being taken advantage of," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Maybe this is an opportunity to practice the former without falling into the latter." When I returned to the room, my mother was alone again, looking small against the white hospital sheets. "The doctor says I'm lucky," she said, her voice slightly stronger. "That if treatment had been delayed even a few more hours, I might not have survived." I nodded, taking my seat beside the bed. It was serious. "And you signed the papers." It wasn't a question. "For the treatment." I did. A long silence stretched between us, filled with the beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. "Why?" she finally asked. I met her gaze directly. "Because it was the right thing to do. Even after She trailed off, unable or unwilling to name the abandonment explicitly. "Yes," I said simply. "Even after that." She looked away, out the window where afternoon light was fading into evening. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." For the first time in our relationship, the silence between us wasn't charged with expectation, no implied request for help, no subtle manipulation, no guilt trip designed to open my wallet. It was just silence, heavy with an understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Over the next few days, as my mother's condition continued to improve, we established a careful routine. I came in the mornings, worked remotely from her room, and left in the evenings. Our conversations remained superficial: hospital food, the weather, television programs. Neither of us broached the deeper issues that had torn our relationship apart. Vanessa visited sporadically, always with one eye on her watch. Liam finally appeared once, smelling faintly of alcohol at 2 in the afternoon, staying just long enough to establish his presence before claiming he had a gig opportunity he couldn't miss. On the 8th day, the doctor confirmed my mother could be discharged soon, but would need rehabilitation services before returning home. I've spoken with your insurance, he told her. They'll cover 3 days in the rehabilitation facility. After that, it would be out of pocket or home care. My mother's eyes flicked to me briefly before returning to the doctor. I understand, she said, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. After the doctor left, she turned to me. I can't afford more than those 3 days. It wasn't presented as a request, not directly, but the implication hung in the air between us. I know, I said evenly. I've already spoken with the hospital's financial counselor. I've covered the major expenses for this hospitalization, up to the limit I set when you were admitted. Surprise registered on her face. You paid for this? Significant portion. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, seemingly processing this information. Thank you, she finally said, the words sounding rusty, unpracticed. I didn't expect that. I know you didn't. Another silence, this one more charged than those that had preceded it. Noah, she began, her voice hesitant. About your surgery. When you called us for help? We don't need to talk about that, I interrupted, suddenly not wanting to revisit that pain. I think we do, she insisted. I handled it badly. We all did. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing beyond. The frail patient to the woman who had shaped so much of my early life, for better and worse. Yes, I agreed. You did. She flinched slightly at my directness, perhaps expecting the old Noah who would have rushed to smooth things over, to diminish his own hurt to ease others' discomfort. I was scared, she admitted. About the money, about getting dragged into debt again. I was scared too, I said quietly. I was facing brain surgery. Alone. The weight of that statement settled between us. For perhaps the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have been there. The apology, so long awaited, so needed, washed over me with surprising effect. Not healing exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition of the harm done. Why weren't you? The question emerged before I could filter it, the child in me still needing to understand the parent's abandonment. She looked down at her hands. I don't have a good answer. Fear, selfishness, years of barely staying afloat financially. She paused. And, somewhere along the way, I started seeing you as the strong one who didn't need help, while Liam and Vanessa were the vulnerable ones who did. I needed help, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. Just that once I needed you, and you blocked my calls. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. We sat in silence again, both processing the first honest conversation we'd had in perhaps our entire relationship. What happens now? She finally asked. After I'm discharged? You'll go to rehab for the covered 3 days, I said. After that, I've arranged for a home health aide to visit for 2 weeks. That's covered under the financial commitment I made. Beyond that, you, Vanessa, and Liam will need to figure out the next steps, she nodded slowly. And us? You and me? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the first day in the hospital. What did I want from this relationship, if anything? Was reconciliation possible? Was it even desirable? I don't know, I answered honestly. I can't go back to how things were before. I won't be the family ATM anymore. I won't have my boundaries ignored. I understand that, she said quietly. Do you? I asked. Because it means a fundamentally different relationship than we've ever had. She met my gaze directly. I'd like the chance to try. To know the person you've become, not just what you can provide. For the first time since her hospitalization, I felt a flicker of something unexpected, possibility. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not trust, certainly. But the possibility that something new might emerge from the ashes of what had been destroyed. We can start with small steps, I said finally. Low expectations, clear boundaries. She nodded, seeming to understand that this was the most I could offer. As I left the hospital that evening, I felt strangely lightened, not by resolution, but by truth. For perhaps the first time, we had spoken honestly to each other, without the distortion of unspoken expectations or manipulative needs. Whether anything lasting would grow from this moment of clarity remained to be seen. But I had stood in my truth, honored my boundaries, and still found room for compassion. And in that balance, I recognized the man I had been working to become. The day my mother was discharged from the hospital coincided with the rescheduled closing on my townhouse. In a strange symmetry, as she was wheeled out of one building to begin her recovery, I was signing papers to take possession of another, both of us entering new phases of our lives. I had been clear with Vanessa about the arrangements. I would cover the agreed-upon portion of our mother's hospital bills and the 2 weeks of home health care after her rehabilitation stay. Beyond that, the responsibility would shift to her and Liam. "But that's not fair," Vanessa had protested. "You're making way more money than either of us." "This isn't about fairness," I'd replied. "It's about boundaries and shared responsibility. Mom has 3 adult children, not just one." The conversation hadn't ended well, but I'd held firm to my position. Years of therapy after my surgery had helped me recognize that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for healthy relationships. After signing the final papers for my townhouse, I drove to the rehabilitation facility where my mother had been transferred. The place was clean and professional, if not luxurious, exactly what her insurance would cover for the limited stay. She was sitting up in a chair when I arrived, looking better than she had in the hospital, but still fragile, still a shadow of the commanding presence I remembered from childhood. "They say I'll start physical therapy tomorrow," she told me as I settled into the visitor's chair. "Breathing exercises, rebuilding strength." I nodded. "That's good. The doctor said recovery would take time." A slightly awkward silence fell between us. We were still learning how to interact in this new, more honest dynamic, no longer bound by the old patterns of her asking and me giving, but not quite sure what should replace them. "I signed the papers on my townhouse today," I said, filling the gap. "You bought a house?" Genuine surprise in her voice. That's wonderful, Noah." "A townhouse," I corrected. "But yes, my first property." She seemed to be studying me, seeing perhaps for the first time the man I'd become, rather than the resource I'd always represented. "You've done well for yourself," she said quietly. "Despite everything." "Because of everything," I corrected her gently. "The boundaries I set after you all abandoned me during my medical crisis forced me to rebuild my life on my terms. It was the best thing that could have happened to me professionally, even if it was painful personally." She flinched slightly, but nodded. "I can see that now." Another silence, this one contemplative rather than awkward. "Vanessa came by earlier," she said finally. "She's concerned about what happens after the home health aid period ends." Of course she was. Always, looking ahead to the next need, the next expense, the next problem someone else would need to solve. "What did you tell her?" I asked. My mother met my gaze directly. "That she and Liam need to step up, that I can't keep depending only on you." I couldn't hide my surprise. This was new. My mother acknowledging that the one-sided nature of our family dynamic needed to change. And how did she take that? A small, tired smile. "About as well as you'd expect. But I meant it, Noah. This experience, it's made me see things differently. How much I've taken from you over the years. How little I've given back." I nodded, acknowledging her words but not quite ready to fully trust them. Actions will matter more than words going forward. "I know," she said simply. "I don't expect you to believe me right away. I'll have to prove it." As I drove home to my new townhouse that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I'd been devastated by my family's abandonment during my health crisis. That betrayal had forced me to rebuild my life without them, to discover my own strength, to pursue my own goals, to protect my own resources. And now, just as I'd achieved the independence and success I'd worked so hard for, my mother's illness had pulled me back into contact with the very people who had hurt me most deeply. But something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the desperate, people-pleasing son eager for approval and willing to sacrifice everything for family harmony. I was a man with boundaries, with self-respect, with the courage to say no when necessary. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of dual responsibilities. I moved into my townhouse, setting up my home office and personalizing the space. Simultaneously, I checked in regularly on my mother's progress, ensuring the home health aide was meeting her needs after she returned to her house. Vanessa remained distant, appearing occasionally at our mother's but never when I was scheduled to visit. Liam was largely absent, offering vague excuses about band rehearsals and job interviews when pressed about his lack of involvement. The final day of the home health aide's contracted period arrived, the deadline I'd set for my financial responsibility. I visited my mother that evening to ensure she understood what would change going forward. The aide's last day is tomorrow, I reminded her as we sat in her living room, the space noticeably tidier than I remembered from childhood. She nodded. I know. Vanessa has arranged to come by during her lunch breaks, and a neighbor has offered to help with groceries. And Liam? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. A sad smile. Liam is Liam. He makes promises, but he rarely kept them. We both knew this truth too well. I want to be clear about something, I said, choosing my words carefully. I'm willing to maintain a relationship with you going forward. Calls, occasional visits, perhaps even holidays eventually. But my financial support ends with the home health aide. I understand, she said, and I believed she did. I'm not expecting anything more from you, Noah. You've already done more than I had any right to ask for. As I prepared to leave, she reached for my hand, the first physical contact we'd had since before my surgery 2 years earlier. When you were in the hospital for your surgery, she said softly, I was afraid, not just of the financial burden, but of possibly losing you. And rather than face that fear, I ran from it. I failed you as a mother. The simple truth of her words, the acknowledgement without excuses, touched something deep within me. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a step toward something new, a relationship built on honesty rather than exploitation, on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. As I drove home, to my townhouse, I realized that the strategic pivot in my life wasn't just financial or professional, it was emotional. Learning to hold space for reconciliation without compromising the boundaries that protected my well-being. Family could still matter, but now it would matter on my terms. 6 months after my mother's hospitalization, my life had settled into a new rhythm. The townhouse was fully furnished, decorated in a minimalist style that felt both calming and distinctly mine. My role at Quantum Digital, formerly Technova, had expanded to include leading a small team developing new payment security features, and Boundary Pay had officially launched, with a modest but growing user base. The app's tagline, "Protect your money, protect your relationships," resonated with people who'd experienced financial exploitation from family or friends. We'd been featured in several finance blogs, and a women's magazine had included us in an article about apps that help you say no. I maintained limited contact with my mother, a weekly phone call, an occasional coffee meetup. True to her word, she never asked for money, though sometimes I could see the struggle in her eyes when she mentioned household repairs or medical copays. The old Noah would have immediately offered to help. The new Noah waited for her to solve her own problems, which, surprisingly, she usually did. Vanessa and Liam remained distant figures, occasionally mentioned in my conversations with our mother, but never directly in touch with me. According to her, Vanessa had taken a second job to help with expenses, while Liam had moved out, sharing an apartment with bandmates across town. On a crisp October morning, I received an unexpected email from a venture capital firm. "We've been following Boundary Pay's growth with interest," it read. "Your approach to financial boundaries and personal relationships fills a unique niche. We'd like to discuss potential investment opportunities." I stared at the screen, momentarily overwhelmed. This was beyond anything I'd imagined when creating the app as a bootcamp project. What had begun as a way to process my own trauma had evolved into something that might actually help thousands of others establish healthier financial relationships. The meeting with the investors was scheduled for the following week. I spent days preparing, refining my pitch, creating projections, planning how the app could grow with proper funding. Marcus helped me practice, playing devil's advocate and asking challenging questions until my responses became smooth and confident. "You've got this," he assured me the night before the meeting. "This app isn't just a business for you. It's a mission. That authenticity will come through." The investors, 3 partners from Elevation Capital, were impressed with both the app's current performance and my vision for its future. What I'd expected to be a preliminary discussion quickly shifted to specific investment terms. "We're prepared to offer $1.5 million for a 20% stake," the lead partner said as the meeting concluded. The figure left me momentarily speechless. Even after taxes and considering the equity I'd be giving up, this was life-changing. Money, far beyond the stock options windfall from the Technova acquisition. "We'll draw up the paperwork," she continued, mistaking my silence for agreement. "But I should warn you, we're not the only ones who've noticed Boundary Pay. Don't be surprised if you get competing offers." She was right. Within days of our meeting becoming industry knowledge, 2 other investment firms reached out with their own proposals. The final offer I accepted was $2.1 million for a 15% stake, better terms and more capital to grow the business. As I signed the final investment documents, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. My family's abandonment during my medical crisis had led directly to this moment of triumph. Their rejection had forced me to set boundaries, which had inspired an app, which had now made me wealthy beyond what any of us could have imagined. The universe had a strange sense of justice. The day after closing the investment deal, I received a text from my mother. "Saw the news about your app. So proud of you. Coffee soon?" Someone had apparently sent her an article about the investment, published in the local business journal. Her genuine pride, with no hint of asking to share in the windfall, felt like another small step in our healing relationship. Over coffee the following week, she asked thoughtful questions about Boundary Pay and my plans for expansion. "It's helping people set financial boundaries with family members who take advantage," I explained. "Users say it's changing their relationships for the better." She nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Sounds familiar." Then, more seriously, "I wish I'd understood boundaries better years ago. Maybe things would have been different between us." "Maybe," I agreed. "But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it." As our conversation continued, she mentioned casually that Vanessa had asked about me recently. She saw the article too. "I think she's realizing what she lost by treating you the way she did." I felt a familiar tension, the pull of family ties against the hard-won wisdom of self-protection. "And Liam?" My mother sighed. "Liam's struggling. Lost his job again, but he's not asking for help this time, at least not from me. I think he knows better now." I nodded, appreciating her honesty and the subtle acknowledgement that our family dynamic had fundamentally changed. No one expected Noah to solve everyone's problems anymore. As I walked her to her car, she hesitated before getting in. "There's a small family dinner next month for my birthday. Nothing fancy, just dinner at my place. Vanessa's coming. Liam might show up. Would you consider coming too? The invitation hung in the air between us, the first family gathering I'd been invited to since before my surgery more than 2 years ago. The old Noah would have immediately agreed, eager to please, to belong, to be needed. The new Noah paused, weighing the invitation against my own needs and boundaries. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Let me check my schedule." She nodded, accepting this limited response without pushing for more. Another small sign of growth, of respect for the boundaries I'd established. Later that week, I had lunch with Marcus, sharing the investment news and my mother's invitation. "Are you going to go?" he asked, curious but not judgmental. "I'm considering it," I admitted. "Not for them, but for me. To see if I can be around them without falling back into old patterns, to test the strength of my boundaries." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You're in a different position now, not just financially but emotionally. You don't need their approval anymore." That's exactly it, I realized. Before, I was always seeking their approval, their acceptance. Now, I'm secure enough in myself to engage with them on my own terms. It was a profound shift, from seeking external validation to standing firmly in my own worth. From desperately wanting to belong in a dysfunctional family system to choosing whether or not to engage with it from a position of strength. The investment in Boundary Pay hadn't just accelerated my financial success, it had validated the very principles I now lived by. The boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish had not only protected me from further exploitation, they had become the foundation of my greatest achievement. In a world that often rewards those who take advantage of others, I had built something valuable by helping people protect themselves. My personal trauma had been transformed into a tool for positive change. And in that transformation, I had found a success more meaningful than money alone could provide. After considerable reflection, I decided to attend my mother's birthday dinner. Not out of obligation or guilt, but as a conscious choice, a test of my own emotional resilience and the strength of my boundaries. I arrived precisely on time, a bottle of mid-priced wine in hand, nice enough to be appropriate, not so expensive, as to suggest I was flaunting my new wealth. My mother greeted me with a careful hug, her smile genuine but tentative, as if unsure how much warmth to show. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "It means a lot." The small house looked different, cleaner, more organized than I remembered. Family photos still lined the walls, including several of me that I'd forgotten existed. My graduation, a camping trip from my teens, a Christmas morning where my smile looked forced, probably because I'd paid for most of the presents under the tree. Vanessa was already there, stirring something on the stove. She turned when I entered, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Wariness, curiosity, perhaps a touch of envy. "Noah," she said with a nod. "Been a while?" "It has," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. An awkward silence followed, broken by my mother. Liam texted, "He'll be here soon." The three of us moved through the kitchen in a careful dance, helping with final dinner preparations while maintaining emotional distance. The conversation remained superficial. Comments about the food, the weather, a new restaurant downtown. No one mentioned my investment deal, my surgery, or the 2 years of estrangement. The doorbell rang just as we were setting the table. My mother hurried to answer it, returning with Liam and an unfamiliar young woman. "This is Tara," Liam announced, his arm around her waist. "My fiancé." The surprise announcement shifted the energy in the room, providing a convenient distraction from the underlying tensions. We all focused on Tara, asking how they'd met, at a coffee shop where she worked, how long they'd been together, 8 months, when the wedding was planned. Next spring, small ceremony. Throughout dinner, I observed my siblings with the detached interest of an anthropologist. Vanessa was more subdued than I remembered. The sharp edges of her personality softened somewhat by time or circumstance. Liam was Liam. Charming, slightly unfocused, his attention constantly shifting. But there was a new steadiness to him, perhaps influenced by Tara's calming presence. "So, Noah," Vanessa said as we moved to dessert, finally addressing the elephant in the room. "Mom mentioned your app got some big investment." And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for, the test of whether old patterns would reassert themselves. "Yes," I said simply. "It's been an exciting time." "That's really cool," Liam chimed in. "What kind of app is it again?" I met my mother's eyes briefly before answering. She gave me a small nod, as if encouraging honesty. "It's called Boundary Pay," I explained. "It helps people formalize financial agreements with friends and family, loans, shared expenses, that sort of thing. It's designed to prevent misunderstandings and protect relationships." The irony of explaining this to the very people whose financial exploitation had inspired the app wasn't lost on anyone at the table. "Sounds useful," Vanessa said carefully. "It is," I confirmed. "Users say it's helping them maintain healthier relationships with clear financial boundaries." Tara, seemingly unaware of our family history, nodded enthusiastically. "That's such a good idea. My sister and I were just fighting about shared vacation costs. Something like that would have helped." The conversation moved on, but I noticed something interesting. Neither Vanessa nor Liam asked for details about the investment amount. Neither hinted at their own financial situations. Neither suggested how my new success might benefit them, so the evening progressed. I found myself relaxing slightly, realizing that my defensive wall wasn't being tested. Whether out of genuine growth or my mother's behind-the-scenes coaching, my siblings seemed to be respecting the new dynamic. After dessert, as Liam and Tara helped clear the table, Vanessa approached me in the living room. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, "for how I treated you when you were sick, for all the times I took without giving back." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar, genuine remorse. "What brought this on?" I asked, not unkindly but cautiously. She sighed. "Partly Mom. She's been different since her hospitalization, more honest about our family patterns. And partly," she hesitated, "partly seeing you succeed without us. It made me realize what I lost when I treated you like an ATM instead of a brother." I nodded, acknowledging her words without immediately accepting the apology. "It wasn't just about the money, Vanessa. It was about being abandoned when I needed you most." "I know," she said quietly. "There's no excuse for that. She trailed off, then tried again. "I got so used to you being the strong one, the one who solved everyone's problems, that I couldn't handle it when you needed something from me." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Not complete, not sufficient to heal all wounds, but a starting point. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. As the evening wound down, my mother walked me to my car. The autumn air was crisp, the street quiet except for the distant sound of a neighbor's television. "Thank you for coming," she said again. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was interesting," I replied honestly. "Different than I expected." She smiled faintly. I had a long talk with both of them before tonight. About respect, about boundaries. I could tell. She hesitated, then continued. "Noah, I want you to know something. Your success, with your job, with your app, I'm genuinely proud of you. Not because of what it might mean for me, but because you've built something meaningful from a painful experience." For the first time in perhaps our entire relationship, I felt she was seeing me. Not as a resource, not as a solution to problems, but as a person with my own journey, my own accomplishments. "That means a lot," I said, surprised by the emotion in my voice. "We damaged something precious," she acknowledged. "The trust between us. I don't expect it to be fully repaired, maybe ever. But I hope we can build something new, something healthier." As I drove home to my townhouse that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 2.5 years ago, I had been devastated by my family's betrayal during my medical crisis. That betrayal had forced me to rebuild my life without them, to discover my own strength, to pursue my own goals, to protect my own boundaries. And now, having reached the summit of professional success, having secured financial independence beyond what I'd ever imagined possible, I found myself considering what healthy family connections might look like from this position of strength. Not dependency. Not exploitation. Not the family helps family manipulation that had defined our previous relationship, but perhaps something new. Something based on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the freedom to engage or disengage as needed for my own well-being. I had reached the summit of my personal journey, and from this vantage point, I could see possibilities I couldn't have imagined during the difficult climb. 3 months after the family dinner, BoundaryPay's user base had grown to over 50,000 active accounts. We'd hired a small team, 5 developers, 2 UI/UX designers, a marketing specialist, and a customer support manager. I'd moved the operation into proper office space downtown, a far cry from the kitchen table where I'd first coded the app. My relationship with my family remained cautiously cordial. Monthly dinners with my mother, occasional text exchanges with Vanessa, Christmas cards from Liam and Tara, who had moved in together and seemed genuinely happy. No one asked for money. No one created emergencies that required my intervention. No one used the phrase "family helps family" to extract resources or assistance. The boundaries I'd established held firm, creating space for something resembling normal family relationships to take root. Then, on a snowy January morning, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Is this Noah Mitchell?" a professional-sounding woman asked. "Yes, this is Noah. Mr. Mitchell, I'm calling from Pine Grove Rehabilitation Center. I'm trying to reach the nearest relative of Liam Mitchell." My stomach tightened. "He's my brother. What's happened?" "There's been an accident," she explained. "Your brother was admitted last night. He's stable, but he's suffered serious injuries. Multiple fractures and a traumatic brain injury." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Despite our complicated history, Liam was still my brother. The news that he was seriously injured hit harder than I expected. "What kind of accident?" I managed to ask. "A car accident. He was a passenger. The driver didn't survive." Her voice softened slightly. "I understand this is shocking news. He's receiving excellent care, but the doctors would like to speak with family as soon as possible." I told her I'd be there within the hour. As I hung up, I noticed my hands were trembling. Slightly, not from fear of being asked for help or money, but from genuine concern for my brother. This was new territory, responding to a family crisis not from obligation or manipulation, but from authentic emotion. The rehabilitation center was a modern facility on the outskirts of the city. I was directed to a consultation room where a neurologist and orthopedic surgeon waited to brief me. "Your brother sustained multiple fractures to his left leg and pelvis," the orthopedic surgeon explained. "He's undergone surgery to stabilize these injuries, which went well. However, the more significant concern is the traumatic brain injury," the neurologist nodded. "The impact caused bleeding and swelling in his brain. We've managed to reduce the pressure, but it's too early to know the full extent of the damage. He's currently in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal." I struggled to process this information. "What's the prognosis? Will he recover?" They exchanged the kind of glance medical professionals use when the news isn't good, but they don't want to extinguish hope entirely. "It's too soon to say with certainty," the neurologist said carefully. "Some patients make remarkable recoveries from similar injuries. Others experience lasting effects, cognitive impairments, personality changes, motor function difficulties. We simply won't know until he regains consciousness and we can assess the damage. I nodded, trying to absorb the weight of what they were telling me. How long will he be in the coma? At least a week, possibly longer. And the recovery process. After that will be extensive, potentially months of rehabilitation. The financial implications were immediately clear, even without them saying it directly. This kind of long-term care would be catastrophically expensive. What about insurance? I asked. Does he have coverage? Another meaningful glance between the doctors. He does have basic insurance, the surgeon said, but it will only cover a fraction of the care he'll need. Someone from Patient Financial Services will be available to discuss options. As they left me to process this information, I felt the familiar weight of family responsibilities settling onto my shoulders. The old Noah would have immediately assumed the financial burden, emptying savings accounts and taking out loans to cover Liam's care. The new Noah. Well, the new Noah needed to think carefully about what healthy boundaries looked like in this situation. I was shown to Liam's room in the ICU. Despite preparing myself, the sight was shocking. My brother, always vibrant, always in motion, lay motionless, connected to machines monitoring his vital signs. His left leg was elevated and heavily bandaged. His head was partially shaved, showing the marks of recent surgery. His face was swollen and bruised, barely recognizable. Tara sat beside the bed, her eyes red from crying. She looked up when I entered, relief washing over her exhausted face. "Noah," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." I moved to stand beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" She shook her head, fresh tears spilling. "I don't know what to do. They keep talking about long-term care and rehabilitation costs. The insurance will barely cover anything. I've called everyone I can think of." The implication hung in the air between us. She had called everyone except me. Even in this crisis, she had respected the boundaries I'd established with my family. "Have you reached my mother and Vanessa?" I asked. She nodded. "They're on their way. Your mother's car wouldn't start, so Vanessa is picking her up." I looked, back at my brother, so vulnerable in his unconsciousness. Despite our complicated history, despite the years he had taken from me without giving back, I felt a surge of protective instinct. This wasn't the calculated manipulation I'd experienced before. This was a genuine crisis, one that none of them had created or could have prevented. "I need to make some calls," I said to Tara. "I'll be back soon." In the hospital lobby, I called Marcus, explaining the situation and my conflicted feelings. "This is different from before," I told him. "This isn't them creating a crisis to extract money. This is real." "It is different," he agreed. "But that doesn't mean you have to abandon all your boundaries. You can help without sacrificing your own financial security or falling back into old patterns." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'm thinking about setting up a fund, something specifically for Liam's medical care, with clear limits and oversight." "That sounds like a compassionate but boundaried approach," Marcus said. "And remember, you're not the only one who can help. Your mother and Vanessa have responsibilities here too." As I ended the call, I saw my mother and Vanessa hurrying into the lobby. Their faces showed genuine distress, not the calculated concern I'd seen so often in the past. "How is he?" my mother asked immediately, her voice thick with worry. "Stable, but critical," I replied, leading them toward the elevators. "The doctors aren't sure yet about long-term effects. There's a lot we won't know until he wakes up." As we rode up to the ICU, I could see the same thoughts forming in their minds that had occurred to me. The overwhelming medical costs, the lengthy rehabilitation, the financial devastation this would bring. But for the first time in our family history, no one looked to me with expectation. No one assumed I would solve this problem alone. Instead, there was something new in their expressions, a shared concern, a collective responsibility. We had reached a turning point, not just in how they viewed me, but in how we functioned as a family. The question wasn't whether I would help. Of course I would in some capacity. The question was how we would face this crisis together, with mutual respect for each other's boundaries and capabilities. As the elevator doors opened to the ICU floor, I realized that the true test of my journey wasn't whether I could cut ties with toxic family dynamics. It was whether I could engage with genuine family needs from a place of strength rather than obligation. This was the return of the past, another family crisis requiring my involvement. But now, I was approaching it as a different person, with different rules of engagement. The real triumph wasn't in walking away. It was in returning on my own terms. The family meeting in the hospital consultation room was unlike any we'd had before. My mother, Vanessa, Tara, and I sat around a small table, facing facts none of us wanted to confront but couldn't avoid. The doctors estimate Liam will need at least 6 months of specialized rehabilitation after he wakes up, I explained, having spoken at length with the medical team. The total cost, even after insurance, could exceed $300,000. The number hung in the air, its weight palpable. In our family's past, this would have been the moment all eyes turned to me, the unspoken expectation that I would somehow make this financial burden disappear. Instead, my mother straightened her shoulders and spoke first. "I can sell my house," she said firmly. "It's nearly paid off. That should cover a significant portion." Vanessa nodded. "I've been saving for a down payment on a condo. That's about $40,000 I can contribute." She hesitated. "And I can take on extra shifts at work. Maybe another $15,000 over 6 months." Tara wiped tears from her eyes. "I don't have much savings, but I can coordinate with his friends for fundraising. Maybe set up an online campaign." I observed this exchange with a mixture of surprise and pride. They weren't looking for a savior. They were looking for solutions, each offering what they realistically could. "I've been thinking about this too," I said carefully. "I'd like to help, but in a structured way that works for everyone." I outlined my proposal. I would establish a medical trust for Liam with $150,000, half the projected costs. The trust would pay providers directly, with transparent accounting accessible to the whole family. My mother's house sale, Vanessa's savings, and Tara's fundraising would cover the remaining amount. This way, I explained, we all contribute meaningfully, but no one person bears the entire burden. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than generous, Noah." "It's not about generosity," I replied honestly. "It's about finding a balanced approach that helps Liam without recreating unhealthy patterns." Vanessa nodded slowly. "It's fair. More than fair, considering—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Considering how they had abandoned me during my medical crisis. Considering how they had taken from me for years without reciprocating. "I think Liam would approve," Tara said quietly. "He's been trying to be more responsible. He talks about you a lot, Noah. About wanting to make things right." That revelation surprised me. My brother had never directly apologized or acknowledged the past, but perhaps he'd been working through his own process of growth and accountability. As we finalized the details of our plan, I felt a profound shift in our family dynamic. This wasn't the old pattern of them taking and me giving until I was depleted. This was a collaborative approach to a shared challenge, imperfect but fundamentally healthier than anything we'd managed before. Over the next 2 weeks, as Liam remained in his coma, our plan took shape. My mother listed her house with a realtor who specialized in quick sales. Vanessa transferred her savings into the account we'd established for Liam's care. Tara launched a fundraising campaign that quickly gained traction among Liam's surprisingly extensive network of friends and acquaintances. And I established the medical trust, working with my lawyer to ensure it was structured specifically for Liam's rehabilitation needs, with clear provisions and limitations. When Liam finally began showing signs of emerging from his coma, We gathered again in his room. The doctors had warned us that the process would be gradual, with periods of confusion and disorientation before full consciousness returned. His eyes opened briefly that afternoon, unfocused at first, then settling on each of us in turn. When his gaze reached me, something like recognition flickered across his features. "Noah?" His voice was barely audible, rough from weeks of disuse. "I'm here," I replied, moving closer to the bed. His brow furrowed with effort, as if trying to organize his thoughts through the fog of medication and brain injury. "You came?" he managed, each word clearly requiring immense effort. "Of course I came," I said simply. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye. "When you needed us, we didn't." Even in his compromised state, with limited cognitive function, this was what he needed to express. Not concern about his condition, not questions about what had happened, but acknowledgement of the past wrong, the abandonment that had fractured our relationship. I placed my hand gently on his arm. "We're not talking about that now. You need to focus on getting better." He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Important," he insisted. "Sorry, we were wrong." The apology, so long in coming, delivered in such unexpected circumstances, hit me with surprising force. This wasn't a calculated attempt to secure financial help. This was raw, unfiltered remorse from a man whose defenses had been stripped away by trauma. In that moment, I made a choice, not just about how to respond to his apology, but about what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. I could hold on to the pain of the past, using it as a shield against further hurt. Or I could acknowledge the genuine growth happening in my family, imperfect and incomplete as it might be. "I know," I said softly. "And we're here for you now. All of us, together." His eyes closed, whether from exhaustion or emotion I couldn't tell, but his fingers tightened slightly around mine before he drifted back into sleep. The choice wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about refusing to let that past dictate my capacity for compassion in the present. About recognizing that boundaries and empathy could coexist. That helping didn't have to mean sacrificing myself. It was the choice I hadn't been able to make before, because I hadn't been strong enough, secure enough, or valued enough to make it from a position of true autonomy. Now I could choose connection, without fear of exploitation. And that, perhaps, was the most profound freedom of all. Liam's recovery was neither swift nor straightforward. Brain injuries follow their own unpredictable timelines, with progress measured in small victories rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The first month after he regained consciousness was marked by personality changes that were difficult for everyone to witness. Frustration would erupt into anger. Tears would follow simple tasks he could no longer perform. The once charming musician with an easy smile had been replaced by someone struggling to relearn basic skills. Through it all, our family maintained the balanced approach we'd established. My mother coordinated with doctors and therapists, practically living at the rehabilitation center. Vanessa managed insurance claims and paperwork, fighting bureaucratic battles with surprising tenacity. Tara provided the emotional support that Liam needed most, her steady presence an anchor in his sea of confusion. And I provided not just financial stability through the trust, but something I hadn't expected: perspective. "It's like starting over," Liam said during one of my visits, his speech improving but still halting. "Everything? Harder now." I nodded, understanding more than he realized. "I know something about starting over." He met my gaze, a flash of the old Liam visible in his eyes. "After your surgery, when we abandoned you." "Yes," I acknowledged. "And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most important." Over the weeks that followed, our conversations evolved. As Liam worked to rebuild neural pathways in his injured brain, we began rebuilding the connection between us. Not as it had been before, but as something new, something healthier. "The trust you set up," he said one afternoon, his voice stronger. "Now. The doctors told me what it would have cost, what you contributed." I shrugged. "Everyone is helping in their own way." "But you had every reason not to," he insisted. "After how we treated you. You could have done what we did, block the calls, pretend it wasn't happening." "I considered it," I admitted. "For about 5 seconds." He smiled slightly. "What changed your mind?" I thought about this carefully. I realized that repeating, "Your mistakes wouldn't heal me," it would just make me more like you were then, willing to abandon someone I cared about when they needed me most. The truth of this struck me as I said it. My decision to help hadn't been about Liam at all. It had been about the person I wanted to be, someone who could remain compassionate without losing my boundaries, someone who could give without being depleted. As Liam continued his recovery, I found myself channeling this insight into something broader. Boundary Pay had been designed to help people protect themselves from financial exploitation. What if we could expand it to help people navigate the complex terrain of family obligations more generally? I began developing a new feature, a resource center with articles, tools, and guided reflections on maintaining healthy boundaries while remaining engaged with family. We partnered with therapists specializing in family dynamics to create content that addressed the nuances of these relationships. "Boundaries aren't walls," read one of the articles we published. "They're windows and doors, allowing connection while maintaining safety." 6 months after Liam's accident, as he graduated from intensive rehabilitation to outpatient therapy, we gathered for a small celebration at my townhouse. The first family event I'd hosted since establishing my boundaries 2 years earlier. I looked around at these imperfect people who shared my blood. My mother, more thoughtful now about others' needs. My sister, learning to stand on her own. My brother, humbled by injury but growing in wisdom. I recognized an unexpected truth. My higher purpose hadn't been escaping them or punishing them. It had been transforming myself into someone who could engage with them authentically, compassionately, and safely. And in that transformation, I had helped catalyze change in them as well. 3 years to the day after I walked out of the hospital alone, my phone call ignored by the family who should have been there, I stood at a podium addressing a conference on financial wellness and healthy relationships. "Family helps family," I began, using the phrase that had once been wielded against me as a manipulation tool. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? A simple statement of reciprocal care and support. The problem isn't with the words themselves, but with how they're applied. When family helps family only flows in one direction, it's not mutual aid, it's exploitation. The audience nodded in recognition. Many of them were Boundary Pay users who had experienced similar dynamics in their own relationships. 3 years ago, I faced a medical crisis that required brain surgery, I continued. When I reached out to the family I had supported financially for years, they blocked my calls. That betrayal changed everything, forcing me to rebuild my life on my own terms, with clear boundaries and a new understanding of what healthy relationships require. I scanned the room, my gaze stopping briefly on the back row where my mother, Vanessa, Liam, and Tara sat listening. They had asked to come, wanting to support this milestone in my career. Their presence was a testament to how much had changed. The journey from that moment of abandonment to this stage today wasn't linear. It included cutting ties completely, achieving success on my own, and then finding a way to reconnect from a position of strength rather than need. It meant learning that boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for genuine generosity to flourish. I shared the evolution of Boundary Pay from a simple financial tracking app to a platform that had helped over 200,000 people establish healthier financial relationships. I explained how our resource center was now being used by therapists and financial advisors to help clients navigate the complex intersection of money and family dynamics. The most profound lesson I've learned is this: true strength isn't found in walking away or in giving endlessly. It's found in the wisdom to know when to do each, when to establish limits, and when to extend compassion. It's found in valuing yourself enough to require reciprocity and respect in your relationships. As I concluded my speech, I looked directly at my family in the back row. And sometimes, when we're fortunate, the very relationships that once caused us pain can transform into something healthier. Not by ignoring the past or pretending it didn't happen, but by acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing a different path forward. The applause that followed was gratifying, but the quiet nods from my family meant more. They understood that my success story wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about breaking cycles of exploitation and creating something better, both for myself and, unexpectedly, for them. After the conference, we gathered at a nearby restaurant. As we waited for our food, my mother raised her glass in a toast to Noah, she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Who taught us all what family really means? I shook my head slightly. To boundaries, I countered, and the healthier relationships they make possible. Liam, still showing subtle signs of his brain injury but infinitely wiser than the carefree musician he'd once been, added softly, to second chances, and making them count. We clinked glasses, these imperfect people who shared my blood and history. Our relationships would never be simple or uncomplicated. The past couldn't be erased, only integrated into a new understanding. But as I looked around the table, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The phrase, family helps family, had evolved from a manipulation tactic to a genuine principle, one that now flowed in all directions, balanced by respect, for each person's boundaries and capabilities. My journey had come full circle, from the desperate man whose calls were blocked during his greatest need, to someone who had not only survived that betrayal, but transformed it into something meaningful. The wisdom I had earned through pain now served as a lighthouse for others, navigating similar waters. And the family that had once abandoned me was now part of my life again, not as burdens or obligations, but as fellow travelers learning to relate to each other with greater awareness and care. Sometimes the deepest wounds, when properly healed, become the source of our greatest strength. My family had accidentally given me the most valuable gift of all, the opportunity to discover who I truly was, apart from their expectations and demands. And in that discovery, I had found not just success, but something far more precious: the ability to choose connection from a place of wholeness rather than need. That was the real triumph. Not wealth, not revenge, but freedom. The freedom to give because I wanted to, not because I had to. The freedom to define family on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.